Now, I want you to keep in mind that God gives Abraham this promise. He gives him this promise. But what you also have to understand, that when Abraham is given this promise, there was no law. God had not given the law. All that existed at this point when God gave Abram this promise was that promise. That was all that there was. There was no law. None whatsoever. The law of God had never come. Not yet. Soon after all of this, Abraham's name would be changed, or Abram's name would be changed to Abraham. Abraham's name means father of many nations. Father of many nations. Now, so two things you have here at the outset. God had given Abram this promise, and then God changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means many nations. So what we as Christians need to understand today is that it was always God's original plan for salvation to be based on the promise of God and not the law of God, number one. And number two, that the salvation or the promises that Abraham had would also encompass many peoples from all of the nations of the world. And this all takes place before the law, before Moses was even a twinkle in his daddy's eye. In fact, the law of God did not come till over 400 years later after this promise. The law of God came 400 years after God made the promise to Abraham. And then we get over to Genesis chapter 16. Now in Genesis chapter 16, we are confronted with a dilemma in chapter 16 and in chapter 17. And I won't read it all because I know that most of you, if not all of you, are quite familiar with the story of Abraham and Sarah. Because this promise that God gave to Abraham, it implied that Abraham would have to have a child. And seeing that not only Abraham was 99 years old, Sarah, I believe, I'm trying to go from the top of my head, I believe she was around 90 years old. She was far beyond the years that one would expect a woman would be able to bear a child. So when Abraham told Sarah of this promise that God had made, not only did Abraham not believe, but Sarah did not believe. And Sarah, to add insult to injury, she laughed about it. She laughed about it. But we're going to see what happens. Because what happens is something that continues to happen to this very day with believers today. In their unbelief, their unwillingness to put their faith and trust in God for Him to accomplish His promises. Now, the Jews of that day and of Christ's day, they found